The sun had just started to set, casting an orange glow over the quiet streets. It was one of those late afternoons where the world seemed to slow down a little. I was sitting in my car, parked by the curb, trying to finish up some work on my phone, when I noticed him. He was a teenager, maybe 16 or 17, with a skateboard under his arm, casually strolling along the sidewalk. He looked like any other kid you'd see in the neighborhood, wearing a hoodie and jeans, but there was something about the way he moved that caught my attention. Maybe it was the way he seemed so lost in thought, as if the world around him didn't matter. I didn't think much of it at first, until I saw the cop. The cop rolled up in his squad car with the sirens off, parking a few feet away from where the kid was walking. I didn't know why, but my stomach dropped a little. Something about this felt wrong, like I was about to witness something I wasn't supposed to see. I watched as the cop got out of the car and started walking toward the kid. "Hey, you," the officer barked, his voice sharp and commanding. The kid froze, looking up in confusion. He looked like he had no idea why the cop was stopping him. I could tell by his body language that he wasn't trying to cause trouble. He didn't look scared exactly, but there was this nervousness in his posture, his shoulders slightly hunched, his hands clenched by his sides. "What's your name?" the cop demanded, stepping closer to the kid. The teenager hesitated for a moment before answering, his voice barely above a whisper. "Gee, Johnny." "Johnny, huh?" The cop didn't seem to care much for the answer. He crossed his arms, looking the kid up and down like he was some kind of criminal. "What are you doing out here? You know you're not supposed to be loitering around, right?" Johnny opened his mouth to respond, but the officer didn't give him a chance. "Where's your ID? You got one on you?" The cop was getting agitated now, and I could see Johnny starting to look even more uncomfortable. I knew that feeling. That sinking feeling in your stomach when you realize you're about to be in trouble for something you didn't even do. I could tell Johnny didn't have a clue why he was being targeted. He wasn't doing anything wrong, just skating down the sidewalk like kids do. "I don't have it on me," Johnny said, his voice trembling just a little. He didn't look like he was lying, just a kid, trying to make sense of a situation that didn't make sense. The officer's face twisted in irritation. "Well, that's just great," he muttered, reaching for his radio. "I'll need backup. You're getting a citation for not carrying ID." I sat at my car, my hands resting on the steering wheel, feeling this knot in my chest. It was like I was watching a scene unfold that I couldn't stop, even though I knew it was wrong. This wasn't the kind of thing that should happen. Not over something as simple as a teenager skating down the street. I glanced around, trying to make sense of what was going on. There were a few other people nearby, some walking dogs, others just passing through, but no one seemed to care much. They were all just going about their day, not noticing the kid being harassed by the cop. I thought about getting out of the car, maybe saying something, but I hesitated. It felt like it wasn't my place to interfere. But still, the tension in the air was suffocating, and I couldn't stop myself from watching. Johnny stood there, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, clearly uncomfortable. I could see the way his eyes flicked back and forth, probably trying to figure out what to do next. He wasn't running. He wasn't even arguing. He was just standing there, taking it, like he didn't have any other choice. "You're wasting my time, kid," the officer growled, stepping closer. "You think you can just skate around without consequences? You think the rules don't apply to you?" The words hit harder than I expected. The kid was just a teenager, barely old enough to drive, and already he was being treated like a criminal. He hadn't done anything wrong, he was just living his life, minding his own business, and now he was being singled out for no reason other than the way he looked, or maybe where he happened to be. I couldn't just sit there anymore. I opened the car door and stepped out, my heart pounding in my chest. The officer's voice grew louder as he continued to berate the kid, but I could barely hear the words over the blood rushing in my ears. I walked up slowly, trying to keep my distance, but close enough to make my presence known. "Is there a problem here, officer?" I asked, my voice calm but firm. The cop turned to look at me, his eyes narrowing slightly as if sizing me up. "Mind your own business," he snapped, clearly annoyed by my interruption. "I'm making it my business," I replied, taking another step forward. "What's going on?" The officer looked at Johnny, who was still standing there, quiet and tense. "This kid's being a nuisance," the officer muttered. "Not carrying ID. Skating in a place he's not supposed to be." I shook my head, disbelief creeping into my voice. "Skating? That's it? He's just a kid," the officer scoffed. "You're one of those, huh? Defending the troublemakers." I didn't back down. "No, I'm defending a kid who hasn't done anything wrong." There was a brief silence as the officer glared at me, clearly frustrated. He wasn't used to being questioned like this. I could feel the tension in the air, thick and heavy. I was starting to get the sense that things could escalate quickly if I wasn't careful. Then, out of nowhere, Johnny spoke up. "He's right," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. The cop glanced at him, his face hardening. "What did you say?" I didn't do anything wrong. I was just skating," Johnny repeated, his voice a little steadier now. "I wasn't hurting anyone." There was a beat of silence. I wasn't sure what would happen next, but I could feel the air shift. It was like the officer was weighing his options, trying to decide if he would back down or keep pushing. Before I could say anything else, another car pulled up. It was a sleek black SUV, one of those fancy government vehicles. The officer turned around as the car's door opened, and out stepped a man in a sharp suit. He looked serious, like someone who meant business. The cop snapped to attention, straightening up. "Sir, is everything?" The man held up his hand, cutting him off. "That's enough, officer." I blinked, confused. The man walked over to Johnny and put a hand on his shoulder, a calming gesture that seemed to surprise both the officer and me. Johnny looked up at him, his eyes wide. "Johnny, are you okay?" the man asked, his voice warm and concerned. Johnny nodded, still a little shocked. "Yeah, I'm fine." I could feel my jaw drop as the man turned to the officer. "This kid is my nephew," he said, his tone cold and firm, "and I don't appreciate how you've treated him. Do you know who I am?" The officer stood there, frozen, his face turning pale. No, sir." The man smiled grimly. "I'm Governor Matthews, and if you ever lay a hand on my family again, you'll regret it." I could see the officer's face flush with embarrassment, but he didn't argue. He didn't even look at Johnny anymore. He just turned and walked back to his squad car, muttering something under his breath. Johnny's uncle, the governor, knelt down to his level, his expression softening. "You all right?" he asked again, his hand still on Johnny's shoulder. Johnny looked up at him, and for the first time, I saw a small smile cross his face. "Yeah, thanks." I stood there, still trying to process what had just happened. The tension in the air was gone now, replaced by a strange sense of calm. Johnny's uncle gave him one last pat on the back before turning to me. "Thank you for speaking up," he said, his tone more genuine now. "It's not always easy to do the right thing." I just nodded, still in shock. The situation had unfolded so quickly, and it felt surreal. But in that moment, I knew I had witnessed something that would stick with me for a long time. As the governor and his nephew walked away, I couldn't help but think about how different things could have been if nobody had stepped in. A teenager, just trying to enjoy a simple moment, could have been treated like a criminal. And all it took was one voice, one person standing up for what was right, to make things right. It was a reminder that sometimes the smallest actions can change the course of everything.